On this episode of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, join me as I discuss the stepmother who hated her stepchildren so much she decided to kill them. Coming up right after this. Hi everyone and welcome to Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans. I'm your host Belinda Brady and welcome guys. Welcome to my little true crime podcast where I talk about Australian crime, Australian murders as I drink coffee. Now, for those who are new to this podcast, I have been doing this for roughly a year. I am a one-woman show and I decided one day that I was going to take my love of talking about true crime and see if I can make a podcast out of it. So far we're doing good and I appreciate every single one of you listening. And like you guys, some of these murders I talk about, I didn't know about them myself until I started researching them for this podcast. So I am learning with you as well and I love that. And of course I do talk about these crimes. I do tell you what happens while I'm drinking a coffee, and today is no different. I am drinking a black coffee with mocha syrup. I'm a black coffee girl. I do like my black coffee with a bit of flavoring in it. Sometimes I'll have something else, but generally that's what I go to. And however you are listening to me, if you're doing some housework or driving or gymming or settling in for the night, thank you for lending me your ears, and I hope you are comfy and ready for this episode. Now, I'll also go really quickly into the stats. I like telling you guys where you're all from, and I did the top 3 countries last episode, and I think I'm going to stick with that for a bit. So number 1, top listeners are from Australia, followed by the United States, followed by New Zealand, and I'm going to chuck in a number 4 here, and that is Ireland. And I love that. Love that you guys are listening to me from over in beautiful Ireland. I love that. Thank you. And you can, if you want to, shout out to me, there are many ways you can do that. You can reply to my videos on YouTube. You can send me a text. You can buy me a coffee. You can subscribe. If you do subscribe, you get bonus episodes, which are ghost stories. Australia is a wonderfully, wonderfully haunted place, and it's another thing I absolutely love talking about. So if that grabs you, please subscribe and we can discover spirits together. And of course, I'll start this episode by telling you what it's called, and it is called Wicked Stepmother Martha Rendell. And my sources for this episode is policewahistory.org, murderpedia.org, and trove.nla.gov.au, and findagrave.com.au. And listener discretion is advised, guys, because this episode does talk about the murder and abuse of children. The last few episodes have been about men who kill. So I thought I'd do something a bit different with this episode. Most of those murders I have spoken about have taken place, in the last 60 years or so. So I thought I'd find one that was about a woman killer and murders that took place in the early 20th century, because I have touched those. And I do love learning more about young Australia. We are a very, very young country, and how we dealt with killers, how we dealt with murderers in that time. And did a bit of research, and boy, did I find a doozy. Now, I found a story about a woman who, in between 1907 and 1908, loathed her lover's children so much that she decided to take matters into her own hands. And as a result of this, she was the last woman to be hanged in Western Australia. Now, the case, this case is also interesting for the reason that there are people who believed and still believe that this woman was innocent and was simply treating her stepchildren for their illnesses. So I'll state the case and let's see, so I'll state the case. I'll tell you the facts of this case and, decide for yourself if you think she's innocent or she's guilty. So get sorted, get settled, my true crime friends, and join me in this episode, which again I've titled Wicked Stepmother, Martha Rendell, the woman who was so obsessed with her partner that she stopped at nothing to have him all to herself. Now, this episode takes us to Adelaide, South Australia in around 1908, and a woman by the name of Martha Rendell. Martha was born on the 10th of August, 1871. And by all reports, Martha was a bit of a rebel for the time, and she went against what society expected of women back then. She left home at 16, took in lovers, had sex outside of marriage, and as a result, she bared 3 illegitimate children before embarking on an affair with a married man. Now, I'll also put some photos up on my TikTok account, and you can also Google her if you don't have TikTok, but I'm going to say it, Martha wasn't the most attractive woman, but she did well. She had no trouble attracting men, and she embarked on an affair, like I said, with a married man. Now, the man in question, his name was Thomas Morris, and Thomas had 9 children to his then wife. And when that marriage broke down, he and his wife picked up and moved to another state in Australia called Western Australia. And Thomas was granted custody of 5 of those children. So it's a bit hard to find more information on exactly what happened there, but I do believe some of the children lived with the biological mother and 5 of them lived with Thomas, the biological father. Now, both Thomas and his estranged wife and their children all packed up and moved to Western Australia. And Martha, devoted as ever to her lover, abandoned her 3 children who were in South Australia with her and followed Thomas and his kids to Western Australia and set up house. And they set up house in a little cottage in a suburb called East Perth. Now, which is not too far from the city not too far from the capital of Western Australia, which is called Perth. And the reason they moved, all of them, the reason that Thomas, his ex-wife, and his children packed up and moved to Western Australia, specifically the area of Perth, was that after receiving an influx of nearly 10,000 convicts, Perth was on the back of a massive gold rush. And on top of that, they also had concurrent grantings of a responsible government. And as a result, the development of the city, of the area, was huge. It was huge. There was major shopping stores which, lined the main street. Electric trams provided transport. Fremantle Harbour, which is not too far from Perth, provided access for larger ships to bring in supplies. The Perth Mint, which is still open today, opened, and the Mundering Dam was opened, which was a huge achievement for the time. So, the city of Perth, the state of WA, was growing and booming with financial and architectural and retail and social success and promise and opportunity. You'd be mad not to go there, especially if you were in a state or an area that was not doing the best, and then you were seeing the success and the growth that another state was happening. Yeah, you would pack up your horse and wagon and you would go. So, like I said, the family all packed up, and Thomas and Martha and the 5 children he had custody of all set up family, happy families in a little rundown shack, little rundown cottage in East Perth. Now, Martha did not like having the children around. Now, she'd waited for him for 10 years. She'd waited for this marriage to dissolve, and she just did not want the kids around. Back in Adelaide, her name was Mud, as were many women who took up with married men. And for whatever reasons, even though Thomas had an affair and everyone knew about it, he couldn't divorce. There was no option to divorce back then, really. It was expensive, it was controversial, and it was scandalous, despite the circumstances, despite him straying outside his marriage. And it's worth mentioning too that Martha copped all the criticism, but not Thomas, but he too strayed. So that just shows how, I guess, misogynistic society was towards women back then. Like he was a willing participant in this affair, but when it all hit the fan, only Martha seemed to cop the brunt of society. Anyway, so almost straight away, this move was not a good one. Not a good one at all. It was not the happy ending that Martha had envisioned for herself. She was stuck in a rundown cottage in East Perth, struggling financially, and her partner, Thomas, was at work all the time, so she was isolated. And, that would be hard for anybody. And this is where Martha found herself. Martha was able to pretend to be the little woman that society wanted her to be, and also any neighbours who, come asking, who are you and what are you doing here? But Thomas's children weren't buying it, and they weren't shy about hiding it. They loathed her, and she loathed them. Martha was alone with them constantly, and the resentment just kept growing and growing and growing. Now, I can't say I blame those children. This was the woman who took up with your father while having an affair behind your mother's back, and now she's living in your house with your father, standing in front of you, demanding you call her mother. And that is what Martha did. She demanded the children call her mother. Of course they're going to hate her. Of course they're not going to like her. So on top of that, Martha had no help from the children when it came to keeping the household in order. The girls were far too young for chores, and the boys were at school. So, isolated without a friend in the world, and the only contact she had apart from the children were the neighbours who liked to snoop, who she referred to as the next doors, and she was terrified they find out that she was only a mistress and not a missus, so she kept away from them. Back then, there was no real help for anyone doing it stuff, especially women who needed a hand to get back on their feet. So if she even had the thought of, okay, this is all too hard, I'm going to leave, there was no support for her. So she couldn't go to the neighbours and make a friend because she was worried about being found out as being a mistress, and she couldn't go to any officials or authorities because just back then society just did not have the support that we have in place now. So at one point, Martha decided she'd had enough and she started abusing these children. And I say she decided to because she 100% made that choice. And no matter how dire her situation was, that is the path she chose, when really, really she could have just left, packed up and gone back to Adelaide. So she made the choice to start abusing the children. She was demanding they call her mother, and when they refused, she would beat them severely. She reportedly beat one of the girls, Annie, so severely she could not walk. Now, I don't know if Thomas knew this was going on or if he turned a blind eye. He is in no way implicated in that he knew the abuse of the children was happening. But this is also where things take a really unexpected turn. It was said that when Martha beat these poor kids, she delighted in seeing them writhe in agony and got sexual satisfaction from it. But I'll get to a bit more about that later. So maybe the children didn't say anything to their father about being abused because they were just terrified of whatever Martha was doing and reacting. Who knows? She kept abusing the children, but that wasn't enough. And she came up with a plan to get rid of them once and for all. And between July 1907 and October 1908, Martha set out to kill Thomas's children one by one in the most cruel possible way. On the 28th of July 1907, 7-year-old Annie was the first to die. The family doctor, a man by the name of James Cuthbert, listed her cause of death as diphtheria. Diphtheria is a serious contagious bacterial infection, and the symptoms include sore throat, loss of appetite, difficulty breathing, and a swollen neck. And back then, children died from it, people died from it, and it was a horrible, horrible, horrible death. Then, only a few months later, tragedy struck again when 5-year-old Olive died on the 6th of October 1907. Dr. Cuthbert was called, and again he listed her cause of death as diphtheria. Now, things were quiet for a bit, but almost a year to the day after his sister died, 14-year-old Arthur died in October 1908. Now, given this was the third child to die in the same household under the same circumstances, Dr. Cuthbert requested he do an autopsy on young Arthur, to which Martha consented to. But strangely enough, she made sure she was present during the autopsy, and she told the doctor to stop halfway through because she thought he'd seen enough. The partial autopsy he was able to do revealed that Arthur died from ulceration of the bowels, hemorrhage, and cardiac failure. And these conditions were put down to typhoid and diphtheria. And as a result of this, no concerns were raised, and life went on. Now, the family grieved the incredibly sad loss of 3 children, and that would be horrific for any loving parent to lose 3 children in the space of a year. But soon enough, it would all come undone for Martha when she tried to kill a 4th. Now, in April 1909, 15-year-old George started complaining of a sore throat. And this sore throat came about after he drank a cup of tea Martha had made for him. And according to George, Martha claimed to have coated his tonsils with her medicine, with her special medicine. Now, terrified, because at this stage he knew he was a smart kid, he knew something was up, he ran to his biological mother's house, telling her he didn't want to go the same way as his sisters and brother. Now, I need to also say here too that the biological mother was living in the same area as her ex-husband and her 5 children, and she had 4 children. So Thomas had 5 and she had 4. I don't know if she had custody of them or if she was involved in the other children's lives, or if it was a case of she didn't see the children. I don't know. I don't have any information on that, I'm afraid. But when George started becoming sick and he became concerned about his stepmother, that's when he took matters into his own hands and ran to his biological mother. Now, he ran to his biological mother, and while this was happening, while George was telling his biological mother all about his horrible stepmother, Thomas came home from work and noticed he was gone, but he didn't raise the alarm. Now, neighbours also noticed George was missing, and when they questioned Thomas, he told them he simply didn't know where his son was, but they were not buying it. This was a family who had 3 children die already, 3 children in the space of a year, and a 4th was now missing. So concerned, they went to the police, and an inspector by the name of Henry Mann started making inquiries. He was told by several people in the area about the rumours getting around that Martha had painted the throats of the dead children with a special medicine, that Martha abused the children and she could not care less about their pain or their suffering. One neighbour even claimed he often peeked through the curtains of the household when he would hear the children screaming, and one time he saw Martha standing in front of a screaming child, rocking back and forth as if she was in ecstasy. Why they'd never reported any of this to the police beforehand, I'll never understand. Inspector Mann then found the runaway Morris child, George, at his biological mother's home, and it was then that George made the allegation that not only had Martha tried to poison him, but she had killed his brother and sisters. With this information at hand, both Martha and Thomas were arrested, with Martha maintaining her innocence, stating that she was simply treating the children for their diphtheria, but the authorities weren't buying it, and she and Thomas were both charged with murdering the 3 Morris children. It was alleged that Martha had been poisoning or painting the children's throats with hydrochloric acid, or spirit of salts as it was called back then, and the children had died a slow and agonizing death as their throats and stomachs slowly burnt away. And it was said that she delivered this method of poison to the children by swabbing their throats with it. So not only was their throats and their stomachs slowly being burnt, they were being malnourished and starving because they were too sick to eat. And lucky for Martha, and whether she did this on purpose or not, I don't know, the children's deaths from being poisoned were exactly the same symptoms as a child would have if they had been suffering from diphtheria. And like I said before, the signs and symptoms of diphtheria is a sore throat, loss of appetite, difficult breathing, and a swollen neck. So when the doctor signed off on the children's deaths, the actual poisoning had been mistaken for the infection of diphtheria. Now, Martha would have walked away scot-free if it weren't for the older boy escaping and telling police of her actions. Now, the children's deaths were put solely on the shoulders of Martha, and as you can imagine, the papers went into an absolute frenzy about this, as did the residents of Perth, especially when it was revealed that Thomas and Martha had been living in sin and were together as the result of an affair. Now, Martha was called every name under the sun. 2 names that stand out is Trollop and Scarlet Woman, but interestingly enough, I couldn't find any hate directed Thomas's way for stepping outside his marriage. He got no shade, whereas Martha did. Now, the trial was delayed as, armed with the news that Thomas had bought a large amount of spirits of salts to the household, police sought and gained permission to have the children's bodies exhumed. And this was done on the 3rd of July 1909. And though a bit of time had passed since the children had been buried and a bit of decomposition had taken place, each one of those children displayed Martha's calling card. Hydrochloric acid, spirits of salts was found on each of their throats. It was all authorities needed, and the murder trial was set. On the 7th of September 1909, in the Supreme Court of Western Australia, the trial of Thomas and Martha commenced on the charge of willful murder before a jury and Justice Macmillan. Neither Thomas or Martha were called to give evidence. On the 14th of September 1909, after a short trial, Thomas was acquitted of murder, and though the jury wanted to charge him with being an accessory after the fact, the judge would not allow it. Reasons given for this was that it was clear that Martha was the dominant one in that relationship and that Thomas had absolutely no idea what she was doing to his children. Now, evidence was given that Martha made the older boy, George, the one who ran away, come into his sister Annie's room to watch her try and get out of bed. Now, Martha was supposedly telling him between laughing at his sister, "Look, boy, Annie can't get out of bed." He said his sister was deathly pale and half sitting up in bed, struggling to get out from underneath the covers. And Martha apparently was taunting her, saying, "Come on, Annie, come on, get out of bed," before Annie collapsed back into bed, sobbing and coughing. It was said this happened night after night until Annie died. George fled the house after Martha tried to give him some of her special throat paint or medicine, telling him, "I think you'd better have your throat done too. You don't want to get sick like the others, do you?" And this, along with other evidence, was all they needed, and Martha was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. Now, she was adamant she was innocent, and she stuck by her claim that she was simply treating the children for diphtheria, and released a statement to the court which said in part, "I am innocent before God and man of having done anything that injured the children in any degree. The spirits of salts were never used by me on the children. If I had done it, I would confess. I believe it would be contrary to most solemn convictions to profess to man to be innocent, when before God I should be found guilty, which would be to me dying with a lie on my lips and a crime on my soul, unconfessed, unforgiven. I pray to God to give me grace to forgive those who have sworn falsely my life away." Now, the theory was that Martha was devoid of any emotion and was simply a pure sadist, and one who enjoyed watching her stepchildren die in pain and got sexual satisfaction from it. She was such an evil, evil sadist that she got off on watching those children writhe in agony and die. And naturally, the press ran with that. I mean, it's not unthinkable. People who get off on the pain of others is not unheard of. It's not new. It definitely could have been the case with Martha. But for what it's, and the press, ran with that. So not only was she a cheating trollop, she was a trollop who got off on watching her partners, her lovers' children die. And as a result of that, Martha was the subject of fascination and speculation, with one paper at the time writing this exact quote: "For the female of the species is more deadly than the male." And there was absolutely no doubt in the public's mind and the authorities' mind that she had murdered those children with plans to murder the others because she wanted them out of the picture so she could have Thomas all to herself. So she was sentenced to death. She was sentenced to death by hanging. And on the 6th of October 1909, after having a cup of tea and a chat with the prison wardess, in which she asked her to follow her to her grave and place a flower on her coffin, at around 8 a.m, Martha Rendell stepped onto the scaffold and was hanged. She said no words, she expressed no remorse, and she didn't confess. And her hanging was witnessed by around 25 people. She was buried in Fremantle Cemetery in a special section where people who had murdered and those who had committed suicide were buried. The wardress placed a bunch of lilies on her coffin as promised, and a distraught Thomas attended her funeral along with 2 other women and a few, sticky beaks. It's interesting to me that Thomas attended. If he thought she had killed his children, why would he attend? That's interesting to me. Martha Rendell was the last woman to be hanged in Western Australia, and the death penalty was fully abolished in 1984. And like I touched on earlier on in the episode, some people still think she's innocent. Not many at the time, but as time went on and people looked at this case, some believe that she simply was treating those children for diphtheria, and it was more of a witch hunt. 3 children had died from a horrible disease, and, we need someone to blame, so let's blame the horrible woman who had the affair with the children's father. I, for one, don't believe that. I believe she did it. I believe she poisoned those children with every intent to kill them, and she paid the price for it. So what do you guys think? Do you think she's innocent? Do you think she's guilty? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And that's it, guys. Another episode of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans done and dusted. Thank you again for your company. You are all absolute rock stars. And until next time, guys, stay safe, stay cool, stay caffeinated, and I will catch you all later.